know I got about 30 seconds to make y'all feel this before y'all turn it off these days. That I might not even release here. But I be doing this shit for me. Help me get through. I feel like I give until I can't, but most don't recognize it till I ain't. Blood on them covers, she hope it's pain. Sorry mama, but it ain't. This world took a toll on me, and everyone that say they love me always seem to follow me. The same one that call me great, treat me like I ain't shit. I read between the lines, it's written all over your eyes. I see the disappointment in the eyes of the ones who want me dead, but I ain't never been scared, I tried to get there. Sometimes I wonder if I survived or did I die on that ride to that hospital. Demons all around me, I am not mental. This game of life, it is not simple. Last time I was happy, I was popping.
Ooh, that was the one and only Neo Love. So welcome, folks. How you doing? I'm the one and only Classic Craig, your host, without the most. And this is very special. This is Loud and Clear, my personal show on Paradigm Shift TV 314. And I'm here with the one, the only, the unbelievable, and the infamous Robert Ash. I added all that. How you doing, Chief? How we doing today?
I'm fine, my brother. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty good, pretty
Uh,
good, pretty good, pretty good. And I just have to say this, man. Um, I am so glad to have you here today. And welcome to the humble land of Paradigm Shift. Welcome. The stage is yours, my friend. Please, please, Mr. Robert, tell us about yourself. Tell us your premise of what you're going to be talking about and just educate us today. So, what we got today, Chief, I can't wait.
well, my brother, thank you for having me on the show. It's a blessing, and a privilege to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And hello again to the Paradigm Shift family. I know it's been a long time. And just to those who don't know me, I'm Robert Ash. I'm a co-pastor of Euphrates Baptist Church, and I'm also a visiting professor at Now Theological College in Juba, South Sudan. And today, I'd like to, it's been a while since I've been on Paradigm Shift, and today would like to discuss a topic of critical race theory in the Bible. And this is something that a lot of times is being presented by people as being mutually exclusive, especially by, say, white conservatives. But it really is the principles of it are really compatible, even though it's not a religious theory, it's not a religious ideology of any kind. So
Cool.
let me see if I bring. Um, okay, let me see if I can see if this will work. Uh, okay.
All right, all right, all
Okay,
right.
let me see if this will. Let me see if this. If I can get this. Uh,
All right, all right, all
let me
right.
see if this thing is not really not window. Okay, entire screen. Let's try that. All right, entire
Okay.
screen.
Put you.
Also share the system audio. Sure. All right, will it share? Now, I can't get this thing to share. I'm sorry. Window. Okay, let's try this one. Here we go. See if that'll share. Okay. Is that better? Can you see that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Adding to the stage. All right, Mr. Robert, it's all you.
Okay, then, Mr. Craig. What we wanted to share today was about critical race theory in the Bible. And basically, what this is, if you're not familiar with it, it's really a system, it's a body of theory, of theoretical, of actual research done by Black scholars at the university level, at the graduate law school level, that really does essentially it documents and shows abundant examples and examines racism on a systemic level. What's called systemic racism, and it's actually, in my personal view, the second only to the gospel. It's the most important issue of our time for our community, and to motivate this, it's just want to ask a simple question out there for everybody. How many of you love your mothers or your daughters or sisters or female cousins, girlfriends, wives? Hopefully everyone. But the fact is that Black women are 6 times more likely to be killed than white women in the United States. And this is a very recent study. And it gets worse than that. It's actually murder. The murder rate for Black women in the United States is 6 times that of white women. And it even gets worse in some places, that in some places like Wisconsin, it was found that Black women were 20 times more likely to be murdered than white women in Wisconsin for the year 1919 and 2019 and 2020. And this is something that the factors that we're going to talk about all have a bearing across society on bringing this terrible statistic to life. And one thing that is important, going back to this, is we look at the TV right now, and the things that we see on the media are things that are important, like Donald Trump, that's important, the coming dictatorship, or and then that's important. But then there's also the focus on the media, say CNN, MSNBC, and those types of channels that seem to be against dictatorship in their mind. When's the last time that we've heard any of them talk about this statistic? They'll talk about, boys want to be girls and girls want to be boys. They'll talk about LGBTQ. They'll talk about abortion and all other these types of issues. But this statistic of Black women being murdered at 6 to 20 times the rate of white women is something they don't discuss in a whole lot of detail. And this same thing happens to Black people across the board in society, in many areas of society. And those are never given the same emphasis and focus in the media, and especially not the right wing media, but even the left wing media, as other issues that are more important to them. And so the reason is that our women, our people, our communities are invisible. Our wives and our daughters are invisible. And a lot of the things that we suffer through and deal with on a daily basis that are targeting us and that are specific to us are invisible in the minds of the general population. And it's time for that to change. So what I want to talk about and share today is first of all, what is critical race theory? Then a little bit of it about its history, and then documented examples that support its observations. And there's going to be across all of society, certainly in the US, but also in some other countries as well. Some of the objections to critical race theory that pop up, and then also, in particular, how Christians should respond. And this is something that could be useful for non-Christians as well. But this is particularly important for Christians because we're representing Jesus Christ on this earth until he returns. So what critical race theory is, it's a body of academic research that documents patterns of disparities in the United States. It started out with outcomes for populations, the different outcomes for different populations under different circumstances, particularly in the enforcement of laws and in the actual way the laws themselves are written. And so what it is, again, a lot of its detractors will say that, it's wokeness and that it's being taught in elementary schools. It's not being taught in elementary schools and high schools or even colleges at the college level. What it is, it's a graduate law course framework at, say, the JD and PhD in law level. And it's a body of documented research that is based, really, if you look at all the literature, read the books, the articles by the seminal researchers on it, uh, the African American scholars who formulated the theory and observed the theory, it is based on three observations. One is that laws, systems, and rules can be racist. It's not just individuals who can be racist. And the people who try to speak out against Black community protests against racism and against observations of systemic racism will try to focus on the individual, that there are individuals who are racist and not societies. But the fact is that racist individuals are in power and in positions to make policies and rules and establish systems. And racist individuals are never going to establish non-racist, fair, just, equitable systems. That's just not the way people work. The second is that rules and systems can be racist even if individuals who make them don't want to be. So one of the examples of these rules and systems is redlining. And redlining is a system, of course, where it was started by the U.S. government back in the suburban boom, and they actually had maps on a wall with red lines around certain neighborhoods, black neighborhoods and other minority neighborhoods that they were not going to lend money to for housing. And so that is perpetuated today even by banks. I know a relative of mine actually worked for a bank where the owner of the bank switched the charter from federal to state so that he could not so that he could so because he didn't want to serve black communities in his area, and the federal charter requires that he does. And this is despite the fact that the lending rates, default rates, were comparable between the areas that he wanted to serve and the areas that he didn't. So these rules and systems, so that's rules and systems that can be racist, is redlining. In terms of individuals, who they can be racist even if individuals who make them don't intend to be is actually more the people who enforce them don't want to be, or the people who are enforcing the rules aren't racist themselves. So an example of this is that you can have an employee at a bank who is not a racist, but the rules for how to lend were determined by racists and created by racists. And so this non-racist employee is following the rules created by racist owners, and the outcome is going to have racial impact. The third is that racist rules and laws can hurt people long after they're eliminated. The third observation, and that is that these redlining laws are causing uh, actually disproportionate impact in terms of housing value, which impacts generational wealth. And then it impacted the ability of Black people in particular to buy homes in the first place, which means that they didn't have, we as a community don't have as much wealth to pass on to our children. And so the repercussions of those things still impact communities today, especially since the practice is still going on. So there are biblical examples of the principles. Again, CRT, or critical race theory, is not a religious framework, but it makes valid observations about the way people think and behave in those. And the Bible has examples of people thinking and behaving the same way, and principles against the harm that racism, systemic racism, does. For instance, laws, rules, and systems can be racist, not just individuals. There's a account in the Bible of a Samaritan woman saying, saying to Jesus, how do you, being a Jew, ask me for a drink, being a Samaritan woman? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. So what happened back in that time is that to the Jews, the Samaritans were effectively the N-word. They hated Samaritans. They were a mixed race of people that were part Israelite and then part Assyrian from the conquest of northern Israel by the king of Assyria. And they hated these people. And so these were rules that were created by Jews among them who were racist. And these rules included that they would spit on the ground when they talked about them. They would go around their territory instead of going through, just to avoid dealing with them or encountering them with them at all. And there were Jews inside Israel, among the Israelites, obviously, who were not racist at all, but they were bound by and punished by these racist rules that were enforced by people who were. And so Jesus broke that norm and engaged with this woman, went into Samaria, engaged with this woman, and ended up preaching the gospel to her. Another one is that rules, systems can be racist even if the individuals who make them don't intend them to be. Is in the days in Acts chapter 6 says, in those days that when the disciples were increasing, the Grecian Jews among them began to grumble against the Hebrew Jews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So the Hebrew Jews at that point, or the new Hebrew Christians, but they were all Jews at that point, were neglecting the Grecian Jews in the administration of food. And these were Christians who were in Christ, who loved each other, and they weren't necessarily intending to say, look, I don't want to give those Grecian widows any food. That's not what the intention was. It's that the attitudes that they had between Hebrews and Gentiles and different nations, and the way that they just automatically started treating one another because of the way they were brought. Those things perpetuated into the rules and systems they created. So what happened was that Peter and the apostles saw that, and they recognized that, and they put the deacons in place to make sure that that discrimination and disparate treatment didn't happen. But the same way that people act today intentionally is the way they were acting back there unintentionally. And these rules and systems can have racist outcomes, even if the people who make the rules and enforce the rules aren't racist themselves, because of the influences that they've had or the way they grew up and the way that things are just done by habit from the past. So again, it's the same nation, Israel, but they had discriminatory practice based solely on ethnicity in this case, and in our day today, that we would be calling that racist. And this is, again, a solidly scriptural principle, but in a solidly scriptural observation, but it's not being acknowledged, especially not among white evangelicals, white conservatives, or even many black conservatives, and by ardent, conservatives or racists. They're not going to obviously acknowledge these sorts of things at all. But these are principles that are valid, and these are the way people behaved even in biblical times, and the Bible is aware of this and dealt with it. So another one is that racist rules can hurt people long after they're eliminated. So now in the Bible, again, all are one in Christ, and there was, the new Christian community that was one in Christ, and they were Jews and Gentiles. By this time, the Romans and Gentiles had received the gospel in Acts chapter 10 through Cornelius was the first one, and so there was this news reached the apostles that the other believers in Judea, that the Gentiles had received the word of God. But then when Peter arrives in Jerusalem, the Jewish believers, and these are Christian believers at that time, they criticized him, saying, "You entered the home of Gentiles and even ate with them." Now, this was a new relationship with God, a new relationship through Jesus Christ, where all were brothers and sisters and equal, but still this leftover attitude was in some of these people, that they didn't want the Jewish Christians associating with Gentile Christians. And that, unfortunately, is reflected today as the church being one of the most segregated, if not the most segregated institution in society, even after civil rights and integration in many other areas have happened. So these sorts of attitudes are recognized by the Bible, and they are pointed out as being problems and wrong. Another thing is that doing new things the old way can also discriminate. And this is one of those things that we just discussed. But then, other things came, like, certain men from Judea saying, unless you're circumcised as the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. It's the same leftover mindset from the old ways. And so even after these racist laws in this country, by parallel, were eliminated, a lot of the attitudes that people had before those laws were eliminated and before new civil rights were put in place, those old attitudes still bubble over and boil over and often come over into people's minds today, as into, who they're going to follow around the store and check to see if they're stealing anything, or just the way that people look or respond or behave in an elevator. All of these different things that happen still are leftover mindsets from the times of formal Jim Crow laws. So we don't have the whites only signs, but we have these leftover attitudes from people who are teaching those same mindsets to their children that still impact us.
So let me ask you this real quick, Robert.
Yeah.
I'm listening, right? And I was wondering, how's he gonna tie this in, right? How are you gonna tie it in? How are you gonna make it flow? So okay, so basically you used back in the time of Jesus how there was different, like how a lot of individuals basically tried to keep the old tradition, even though that was thrown out, right?
Yes,
And
exactly.
so basically you show like through generation and generation, it was taught. You see what I'm saying? Taught for them
Yeah.
to have this superstition and this mindset. Now we're here in today's time, right? We're looking at basically how a lot of people, well, basically you're showing that racism is not something that is in human nature. It is taught. It is a behavior. You see what I'm saying? And you're basically making a lot of people in a lot of ways see that regardless of the matter of religion, right? If you put racism in it, it would pretty much in a lot of ways cause, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it would
No.
cause it to not be true. And the message would be corrupted when it's not intended for that at all. Am I following you, or is a
Uh,
little bit?
yes, that's part of it. In particular, to your point,
Hmm.
what will happen is that parts of it will be corrupted, and those parts of it will hurt the perception of the parts that aren't. So in this case,
Okay.
uh, there was for instance, the here's what Jesus said about it. That I'll tie this back to today. He said that the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they teach you, do, but don't do what they do, because they say and they don't do it.
Right.
So, in today's terms, that is that there are a lot of preachers out there and Christians out there that believe that Jesus Christ is the Savior, that we must be born again, that we are all sinners before God,
Right.
and that Jesus Christ is the only salvation, and that Christian love is the way that we're supposed to treat each other, right?
Right. Right.
So, those are the correct principles. Now, what happens is that those same people don't live what they preach, right? Sexist and discriminatory. They will speak out against like critical race theory, which is we're going to see that this is actually a whole bunch of examples that are proven.
Right.
And so what they'll do is they'll try to twist it and say, no, this is some racist ideology or comes from Marxism and all that sort of stuff, right?
Hmm.
So, and that's because there's a lot of what they have learned from their lives, from their parents, from their communities, from the people that they hang around, that is wrong. And terms of the way that they um, will articulate the principles of the Bible, but they don't live it out. And then when it comes to a point where they actually have to apply it, then all of a sudden they start saying, well, no, that's just, it didn't really mean that, and it means this and that sort of thing.
Right.
Now, to your point, as far as being taught, um, unfortunately, there is a sort of a heart deep, soul deep desire. And well, before I get into that, there are a lot of people who are not like that as well. And that is why we've been able to make the progress that we have made. I don't think anybody here listening, certainly me I'm certainly you, none of us would want to go back to formal Jim Crow,
Hmm.
with all of that stuff. And none of us would want to go back to slavery, right? So even though things are not hunky dory now, and there's a lot of problems now, I don't know. I haven't met too many people, in fact, nobody that I know, that really would want to go to the whole thing back there in the 1950s, where you couldn't even, drink from the same water fountain as a white person, right? And,
Right.
and couldn't get jobs. Like a lot of us have jobs today that we couldn't get if Jim Crow was still here, right?
Right.
So that is and the reason, one of the reasons that happened is because there were good people among the church, among white people that saw, yes, we are doing wrong, and they decided to change that. And some of them even died. It got killed for it and ostracized, because they wanted to, because they knew that what was being done to us was unjust. So I don't
Right.
want to say that it's all white people, and I don't want to say that it's the whole church and all of that stuff. But
Right.
these are elements that come into the church. Now, on top of that, there's sort of a separate but parallel issue that people, as a whole, there are many people who enjoy feeling better than somebody else, and they also enjoy despising somebody else or looking down on somebody else, and they have their own personal problems,
Hmm.
that and their own personal spiritual shortcomings that and faults and flaws that really lead to that. So there is so racism is taught, uh, but there's other things but there's also in parallel with that a sort of an inbred a sin inspired desire in many people to feel like they're better than someone else in some way.
Right.
And in our case, in our society, race is a really good, convenient rather, way of doing that for that type of people.
Right.
But you're right, a lot of what we're experiencing in this life, in this society, is taught. And if people had been taught from the beginning, say if this horrific moral compromise hadn't been made in the beginning to allow slavery in the United States and make slavery and racism an integral part of the DNA of this culture and the founding documents and
Hmm.
the mindset of the people that formed this country. If they had done what God said to do instead of what the flesh and the devil had said to do,
Right.
and not allow this slavery, we would be in a much better place. And there are places, you know, that are more magnanimous than the United States. Like for instance, I was kind of surprised. I used to live in Germany, and my dad was in the army, and one of the guys that worked for him was getting out of the army, and he said that he was going to stay in Germany.
Hmm.
And I said, "Why do you want to do that?" I said, the United States, and I mean, because I was young. I was taking, civics classes. I was like in the seventh grade, and
Right.
then the United States, all this, this is the greatest country in the world, this, that, and other thing. And he said, "No, there's too much racism there. It's better here, right?" So this is a young black man, 18, 20 years old. He was gonna, or however many, 22 or whatever. He was gonna get out the army, 24, whatever. But he was going to stay in Germany because it was better there. So there are places in the world where people are better on this race issue. The United States, unfortunately, has it baked into its founding. And so we're particularly keen to divide people by race.
Right. I see. Oh yeah, it's in everything. The jokes, media,
Yeah,
clothes,
right,
yeah, even
right.
food.
Yeah,
Angel food,
even that's
angel
right.
food, devil food, Never
Yep.
liked angel food. They never liked it,
Yeah,
but
I like chocolate a lot better. Chocolate's my favorite thing.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, but you're absolutely right.
I got you, I
Okay.
got
All right. So now some of the history, just to make sure, because what will happen is that a lot of the people that are against critical race theory also misrepresent the history and slander the history of it. So really, the way that it happened, again, this is in law school, graduate law school, and what happened was that it grew from what is called critical legal studies, and this was like in the 50s and 60s, a a study among some legal scholars that argued that the law was not objective or apolitical, right? That there were politics and personal objectives baked into many of the laws. And one of the easiest ways to see this is sort of how some of these development contracts get handed out, right? And the way that they're written, and I've seen some of these government contracts and private contracts,
you.
that when they want to, they'll say they want to award a certain developer a contract for, say, developing a neighborhood. And they'll say, well, in order to qualify for this contract, you have to have 7,200 employees, have an income of revenues of like $250 million a year, and you have to be located on on Third and Main in Oakland, right? So, and sometimes it's not that blatant, but the way that they do things are that uh, they'll wriggle these contracts and construct the contracts to favor one developer over another. Then they'll have what's called, an objective bid or an open bid or whatever, and it's predetermined who that's going to be. Another thing are things like eminent domain, where they seize people's property to do something like build a street or highway. This was used against, and we'll see some of this later on. It was used extensively to destroy black neighborhoods in the past, and it still has damage today. But it's things like, you don't see eminent domain in Beverly Hills, right, where they're snatching Kim Kardashian's house and they
Right,
say we're going to build a freeway through there, right?
right,
So these types of laws, even though they appear neutral on the surface, really aren't. They are political because they better not go into, you know, West Hollywood or whatever, and build a road down there. They
right,
didn't take the space shuttle from Edwards Air Force Base to this its other location. They didn't go through Westwood and UCLA, right? They pulled it through, lower income neighborhoods. So that's a political thing. It's not an issue of fairness or of objectivity, right? So these types of things are and were observed during the 50s and 60s, uh, saying that the law was not objective or political. And so critical here, another thing too, doesn't mean just criticizing stuff. It means to take a close look and examine what makes something tick, what actually makes it work, how does it actually operate.
right,
So critical legal studies was that idea. Another thing was that these critical race theory, these focus ideas started in the 1970s in law schools. And Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, she's really great. If you get anything that you can read or hear by her, she's got some YouTube videos that she explains a lot of this. She's great. And some of these other scholars were in different locations at different law schools, and they were all beginning to observe the same things, right? And so they started communicating with one another and saw that they all had sort of similar observations when they were doing this independent analysis. And what they were doing, these thinkers, was focusing really on failed promises. So back from the 1960s, there were these, kumbaya sorts of promises of, not judged by the color of your skin, but by the content of your character. We've got civil rights now, voting rights laws. And so all the things are going to be hunky and dory and things ought to be better. But it turns out that they really weren't getting better. And they were wondering why, right? These promises seemed to fail and they were wondering why. And in doing their investigation, they saw that there was a pattern of these same types of behaviors and same type of systemic behaviors in society going all the way back to the Reconstruction era when abolition came. And then there was the rise of the Ku Klux Klan as a response to that, to try to, in the Jim Crow laws and all of that, that went to so-called keep black people in their place, which is a place they wanted them back in the field again. But that was a systemic, widespread, coordinated attempt to disenfranchise black people and to make it impossible for us to benefit from our newfound freedom. And so they saw these sorts of patterns, the same types of patterns that are executed in different ways over this long period of history, up to and including the post-civil rights era. So the name critical race theory was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. They didn't have a name. She came up with it and it stuck. And it's a good name, frankly. So some documented examples, and this is really where we're going to get into the meat of this. So first is treatment by police. And what the Bible says, and we're aware of like disparate treatment of police of black versus white people overall in this country. The Bible says, do violence to no man, neither accuse anyone of falsely. And this is in Luke 3:14. And back then, John the Baptist was speaking to Roman soldiers. At that time, the soldiers were the police, right? They were the ones that went out and enforced the laws and arrested people or whatever else, threw them in jail, or did whatever, otherwise punished them. So what John is saying is two things. Do violence to no man. That doesn't mean that if somebody is, killing somebody, that you don't kill them, or they're trying to shoot you, you don't kill them. What it means, violence in this case, is brutality, what we call, unnecessary brutality, where you're beating up innocent people just to, because you're mad that day, or just to teach them a lesson or whatever it else, right? And that is what we would call today police brutality. So don't do police brutality is the core meaning of that. Neither accuse anyone falsely. So don't plant evidence on people. Don't make up stuff. Don't turn up your body cam, when you're doing something wrong, right? And don't give false testimonies and write false police reports, right? So those sorts of things are those principles in the Bible apply to how police are supposed to behave today, according to God. And so here we see in Aurora, new chief, an Aurora situation in Aurora, Colorado. And you might have heard about this, but this is a black woman and her 4 children, aged 6 to 17, laying face down on the pavement. And what happened was that these police officers mistook her license plate for, on her black SUV there, they mistook it for a stolen motorcycle in Montana. And this happened in Colorado. And so not only was that a bad mistake to make, a basic mistake to make, they could have corrected that pretty easily, but we can see and be sure that if this was a white, blonde, suburban woman with her big, nice SUV and her 4 darling little white children, this never would have happened to them. And of course, there's always going to be some corner case where it says, yeah, this happened to me, this happened to me. But this type of thing happens a lot more to black people than to other people, or to racial minorities than to other people. And and it wouldn't even enter into the mind of some of these officers to treat people the same way they would. Now, when I was uh, when I first had graduated from Stanford, I was working with a guy that was my boss was a Stanford lecturer, right? He was a lecturer there, and he was telling me he was on a jury, and then, and no, he was jogging through his neighborhood, and there was a fire, and he was talking to the police officer, and
Mm-hmm.
he said, and this police officer told him, he said, this kid, he asked what happened. He said the kid got mad at his parents. This is in Portola Valley. This is very, very wealthy neighborhood.
Right,
And
right.
so he said that, this kid was mad at his parents, so he set his house on fire. And if this kid was in East Palo Alto, I would
Mm-hmm.
just throw him in the police car and drag him to the police station. But because he's out here in Portola Valley, I got to say, well, Johnny, you shouldn't do that, right? So this is something systemic, because this is the same treatment that these people get uh, around the country compared to our kids, which they get the third degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this sort of thing would not have happened, almost certainly would not have happened, had this been a different woman of a different race,
Right.
right? Another thing is that the officers who did this weren't even charged. There were no charges filed against them, and one of these guys actually started running for sheriff. So this is
Wow.
treatment by police is something that, and these sorts of things happen across the country. This is not an isolated incident in its severity. Another thing is that in St. Paul, they found out that black drivers were nearly 4 times more likely to be pulled over than white drivers. And a Stanford study actually proved why. It showed that black drivers get pulled over by police less at night when their race is obscured. So when they can't see who's driving the car, the arrests are about the same racially. But when they can see who's driving the car, black drivers are nearly 4 times more likely to be pulled over.
Hmm. Oh man.
Another thing is just the whole criminal justice system. The Bible says that one law shall be to him that is homeborn and to the stranger that sojourns within you. But the criminal justice system in this country, and in other countries too, but in America as well, doesn't do that. So the data here, and there's different studies like the University of Michigan, right, that says that the average sentencing was 55 months for whites and 99 months for blacks. And this is for the same crimes, the same offenses with comparable backgrounds of criminal or lack of criminal backgrounds. Another thing is that black men statistically receive harsher prison sentences than white men who commit the same crimes, according to the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And it goes on. Black offenders were 75% more likely to face a charge carrying a mandatory minimum sentence than a white offender, check it out, who committed the same crime. Again,
Hmm.
this is across the country. This isn't something that one individual person is doing. This is a pattern of behavior across the country. Another thing is that the United States Sentencing Commission had some really disturbing findings in studies that it's done. So again, black male offenders continue to receive longer sentences, uh, uh, usually 20% longer than similarly situated white offenders during the post-report years. And this was from 2012 to 2016. Non-government sponsored departures and variances, uh, contribute significantly. What this is a fancy way of saying of leniency, right? That a departure is, we're not going to give you the sentence, we're just going to let you go, put you on probation or whatever else, give you a second chance. That happens far less often to black offenders than to white offenders, again, who are similarly situated, who have comparable records and commit the same or comparable offenses. Another thing, too, is despite all of these stereotypes about violent black men and violent black women that are false, but still they're stereotypes, actual violence in an offender's criminal history does not appear to account for the demographic differences, meaning that white violent offenders And black violent offenders, white nonviolent offenders, black nonviolent offenders still have the same comparable disparity in the amount of sentencing they receive. And many times this is in front of the same judges. And there have been studies of different judges who have been busted doing this. The same
Hmm.
judge would give different sentences to people of different races for the same crime with comparable history. That again goes against the Bible. The Bible is supportive of this, and the principles of the Bible support the findings of critical race theory in this area, that one law should be the same that is homeborn and to the stranger that sojourns among you. And these strangers came from different races, different ethnicities, and different countries that sojourned in Israel. School discipline. The Bible says that whoever shall offend one of these, Jesus said this himself, that believe in me, it is better that a millstone were hanged on his neck and he were cast into the sea. Again, the opposite of what the Bible is saying is being done in our society, saying that students of color disproportionately suffer from police assaults at school. Now, listen to the wording here. Police assaults, assaults by police officers in schools, assaulting children. That's disproportionately happening to to students of color. And this is a report, and this is one from Public School Review, and this is across 97,000 public schools across the country. And it says that Black and Latino students are consistently punished more severely than white students for the same infractions. 50% of preschool children suspended multiple times are Black, and Black students are less than 1/5 of the preschool population. And it's really, gets bad too. It goes on like
At
Black,
preschool? At,
and
at,
yeah. That's a good, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good catch. Preschool children suspended multiple times.
uh, they not even potty trained yet, and they getting suspended. Wow.
Exactly. And not just suspended, supposed multiple times, for what less than 1/5 of the population, like that's 2.5 times their representation in the preschool population, right? Black students are far more likely to be referred to law enforcement or arrested for a school-based offense than white students or other students of color. This is law enforcement. Schools calling the police on students. And that includes a 6-year-old student in Florida. There was a 6-year-old girl, little Black girl, who was arrested in handcuffs when the school called the police on her. So the school called the police on her, which is outrageous. I mean, I could not imagine anything that a 6-year-old girl would do that was bad enough to call the police. And then
Right.
when the police got there, instead of being, you know, peace officers, servants of the public, they put handcuffs on a 6-year-old girl. So this is not something that's just random by one racist here and there.
Right.
Another thing, Black girls are suspended more than girls of any other race.
Hmm.
So this is something that, again, is systemic across 97,000 public schools across the country. It's not just what these anti-CRT people like Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, and all of these, John MacArthur, these preachers and stuff, John MacArthur and this other guy that I was arguing with on Facebook today, trying to say that it was just individual racists. That's not
Right.
true. These are systemic across 97,000 public schools across the country.
Right.
And so the consequences are pretty obvious. For Black students, unfairly harsh discipline can lead to lower grades. You get discipline like this, arrested and handcuffed at age 6, and you see your white kids getting away with worse things. And then Black students see that it's only them being targeted or they're being punished more than others. It leads to lower grades. How can you focus on academic excellence when you're worried about this kind of stuff? When you
Right.
see kids that look like you hauled off in police cars, while white kids just go on to next class for doing the
Right.
same thing.
Right.
Okay? But again, the Bible says that this is wrong and that those that do these sorts of things, it's better for them that a millstone were hanged on his neck and he were cast into the sea. medical treatment. We all know about most of us have heard probably about the Levite, the Good Samaritan, right? So the Good Samaritan, there was a man beat up and robbed and dying on the street, and this Levite, this uh, basically these were the priestly, the tribe of Israel. They
Right.
came to the same place, passed by on the other side, didn't even care, right? So that sort of thing is actually happening as well. And then Jesus commended the Samaritan who took the injured man, had him bind up his wounds, paid for his care until he got better. But these Levites type of mentality happens in the medical field. Now, I've rather read articles about doctors saying that they are taught in medical school. Now, this is in medical school. I mean, not all of them, probably, but too many. One is too many, and too many of them do, that Black people feel less pain than white people. So there's racial bias in pain assessment and treatment recommendations. Black people are more likely to be left in pain, to be not given pain treatment. And these false beliefs come from biological differences between blacks and whites. And of course, that is just like the old, face shape, head shape, native intelligence, racist theories of the 19th century. Those still propagate into the medical training and medical attitudes right now, today, in the 21st century.
Mm.
And it's the African American medical community has issued, wrote an article that Black patients tend to fare better with Black doctors, and that seems to be, it's obvious why that would be. And frankly, I've had bad experiences with Black doctors and good experiences with them, and bad experiences and good experiences with other colored doctors. And really, what it does, it's a doctor who cares about you, right? If they care about you, they're going to treat you well. But the
Right.
thing is that when you walk in and people see you, then many times, then it's not automatically just not going to care, and that's going to be reflected as doctors in the treatment that they give you or that they don't. Okay?
Right.
And again, this is systemic across the medical industry, or the medical industry in the United States. And there's reports even written about it by the National Institute of Health and other agencies. Bank loans. So mortgage rate denial for Black borrowers is twice that of overall population. And it gets even worse when you look at what's going on underneath the scene, is that Black applicants almost about twice as 1.8 to 2.5 times as likely to be denied as white applicants. And listen, with similar observable borrower characteristics, the same credit scores, the same background history, same comparable incomes and debt load, and all of those factors that go into bank loan calculations. And not just that, similar observable borrower characteristics in all neighborhood types. So it doesn't matter what kind of a neighborhood that a Black borrower wants to move to, an upscale, white neighborhood, a low scale Appalachian white neighborhood, it doesn't matter, or into a Black neighborhood, upscale or not upscale, they're twice as likely to be denied a loan with the same as a white person with the same credit profile, right? And so the Urban Institute and the Federal Reserve Bank, in fact, found that it's not just homes, it's businesses too, that white-owned small businesses were twice as likely to be fully approved for financing as Black and Latino-owned firms. This is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which has a very broad view across the borrowing market. Forbes magazine, another one, right? That Black and Latino-owned businesses were less than half as likely to be approved for loan applications at all, and especially fully approved for loan applications. So it's harder to get a loan. When you get a business loan, it's not what you need, whereas a white firm will get the amount of funding that they need. What is that going to do to the business environment in Black neighborhoods versus white neighborhoods? What does that do to business creation and wealth creation for Black people compared to white people? Now, the Bible is again against this. a false balance or injustice with money is an abomination to the Lord, but a
Right.
just weight is his delight, right? The Bible supports the findings of critical race theory that this is wrong and that this needs to be corrected and changed. And again, even though critical race theory isn't a religious theory, the observations that it makes are solid and viable and valid, and the Bible supports the observations themselves, and especially correcting the observations, supports the fact that these observations are observing things that are morally wrong. Housing appraisals, right? This is and again, unequal weights and measures, unequal weights or measures or appraisals are an abomination to the Lord, and false scales that weigh things are not good. Proverbs 20:23. This is a couple that settled a lawsuit in home appraisal. And this is in Marin County, which is a very affluent county. This couple lived in Marin County.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that their housing appraisal was done twice. First, someone came and saw them, and then they felt something was fishy. So what they did was that they changed all of the art in the room, in the house, and they had a white couple stand in and pretend they owned the house. So what happened was the same company came back, appraised the house again, and upped the appraisal by $500,000
Mm.
when they pretended it was a white owned house instead of a black owned house. What would that do to your personal wealth? And to have a $500,000 difference like this. And so what happened was that they sued them and won, which is good. This ought to happen many more times. But
Mm-hmm.
this is something, again, that happens throughout the entire appraisal industry, because the New York Times found that there's widespread bias in home appraisals, right? And even Freddie Mac says pervasive bias in the home appraisal industry. And Freddie Mac is the government agency that gives out the loans, right? So
Right.
this is something that's real, and it's real across the country. Uh, for Black people compared to white people is this loan discrimination.
Right.
And again, the Consumer Financial Protection Board is trying to protect people from discriminatory home appraisals. And it turns out that the MAGA forces, this Project 2025, that Donald Trump and his supporters, his political supporters, one of their main targets for elimination in the government is the Consumer Financial Protection Board. That's
Mm.
no coincidence. Okay?
Oh man. Oh man, you kind of blowing me away right here, Robert. You're blowing me away. But keep
Praise
going,
the
got to
Lord,
keep
Craig.
going.
Yeah, and there's more, and God gives hope for this, but this is something that we shouldn't be fooled by people who are trying to write this off as some racist philosophy. Critical race theory exposes racist philosophy, racist practices. It is not a racist philosophy. It exposes genuinely racist practices, right? So let's talk about again. It doesn't stop there. Hiring, promotion. Do not hold the wages back the wages of someone you've hired, not even for a night. That promotion, pay, and all of that stuff is supposed to be fair. This is Leviticus 19:13. So what's happening is that Blacks in STEM jobs are especially concerned about diversity and discrimination in the workplace. And I have particular personal interest in personal experience with this. My career was in Silicon Valley, and this company that I work for is a large data management company, one of the largest in the world, and in the industry. And I worked there, for over 20 years. And in that entire time, I was in the core development of the core database product. And so, in that entire time, I saw three Black product managers, including myself, right? And one of them was a brother from Benin. He's still there. Another one came and then went, and then me. And that's in that time. Then I went to another company where that was doing an artificial intelligence, and I was working on large scale artificial intelligence and other platforms there. And I saw, and this was a traditional manufacturing company. I saw more Black executives in my first 6 months than I'd seen in 20 years at the Silicon Valley firm. And also, companies like Facebook and Google and so forth have eliminated their diversity and inclusion and they programs. And there are a lot of reports of different of these high tech companies and the news making all this great news and these unicorn companies, $1 billion valuations. And there was one of them where a black development manager had quit, and it was a very well known company where the development manager had quit because uh, it was one. Like I don't want to say the name because I don't remember the exact company. If I knew it, I would say it because there was a news press release about it. But
Right.
I don't want to, But anyway, this company was one of these big, well-known startups, and he said that there was just too much prejudice where he was, and he was a development manager. He managed developers, software developers, right? So, and it's not just honestly, it's in the Valley, it's a lot about Black and Latino people, but throughout the rest of society, it's not just that. So here is a quote from an Asian woman who is a surgeon, a 45-year-old surgeon, and at age 45, she's probably been practicing surgery 15 or 20 years, and
Right.
she said that people look at the color of my skin and automatically start doubting my ability and my knowledge of my job. Right. And this is someone who is Asian, and these are the ones that are put up by these, MAGA types as being the model minority, right? And they even suffer from it. They just don't, it's not as pervasive as it is with us, but still, this is a systemic issue throughout uh, the job market, frankly. So Silicon Valley does it kind of in a slick way. So what they do is that when they interview you, they look for what they call fit. And fit is, do you fit into the culture of the company? And that sounds great on the surface, and it's not automatically a bad idea. Inherently, it's not a bad idea. But really, what it is a proxy for saying, well, do I personally like you and like your kind or your type? Do you fit in here? Do I vibe with you and that sort of thing, right? And what happens is that because of that, a lot of these Silicon Valley firms are drastically underrepresented, have a drastic underrepresentation of particularly Black and Latino developers, technologists, product managers, and executives. Okay. Another thing is that God is not mocked, right? So this discrimination is costing the company, the overall economy, trillions of dollars. And there's a study here says that I know if Black wages, education, investing gaps had been closed 20 years ago. Now, civil rights happened almost 80 years ago, but just 20 years ago, at the turn of the millennium, right, it would have added about $16 trillion to the economy. And this is a report by Citi. This isn't, and Citi or Citigroup is a huge banking operation. It's a global international banking concern, and they did a study that showed this, right? So God is not mocked. This is actually hurting everybody, but not everybody cares. And so this is something that's really important for us to care about.
Right.
Voting rights, and this is something we've heard an awful lot about. And this is a quote from Isaiah: Judgment or justice is turned away backward, and justice stands afar off. For truth is fallen in the street, and equity or fairness cannot enter." And that's what's happening today in voting rights. It's now illegal in Georgia to give food and water to voters in line. Now, what in the world is the threat to democracy if you bring someone a bottle of water while they're standing out in the hot sun waiting to vote? The answer, there isn't. But this rule was made because they targeted, knowing that Black people in particular, because they closed down a lot of the voting places in Black neighborhoods and Black areas, had to stand in long lines out in the hot sun waiting to vote. And they needed supplies like food and water and so forth. So what they do is, this is the new Jim Crow. It's the new, what they, and nowadays they call it alt-right. They came up with this name for it instead of white supremacy. But what they do now is, instead of hanging whites only signs on, or Black people can't vote here, what they do is they look at the characteristics that empower Black voters in particular, and the needs that Black voters in particular have, and then they make rules and laws making those things illegal. Right. So that makes it more difficult for Black people and specifically to vote, or other minorities, but Black people in particular to vote without actually naming Black people out by name. It's their new strategy. In fact, Breitbart, which is like this right wing website, they actually had an article a while back that shows how the new white supremacy works. That they don't wear sheets anymore; they wear Dockers and golf shirts,
Yeah.
and and speak proper language. And they don't talk about N words and and all of that stuff. N word lovers. What they do is they have these philosophical sounding principles that sound so fair on the surface, but they're not. They're
Right.
geared towards slanting the truth a certain way, or trying to put in doubt where there shouldn't be, or trying to misrepresent something as being unprincipled when in fact it's based on fact. And that's what they're doing in their slanders across the board of critical race theory. Another thing is that after the election didn't go the way that they wanted, these types went and passed in 1 year 150 restrictive voting rules, and this is the first 2 months of the year 2023. So there's 27 election interference bills and so forth, and there were some expansive voting bills as well. But this 150 restrictive voting bills is something that shows the new strategy and tactics that they're using to deny voting rights, specifically to Black Americans, but to anybody that they don't like. Another one is things like a Texas bill that would allow presidential electors to disregard the state election results. So these electors that are supposed to cast the votes for the president and that are required to do that,
Right.
um, these people, under this new proposal Texas bill, hopefully it won't pass, but they would be able to disregard the election results if the election didn't go the way that they wanted. And in Virginia, it would empower. They did this a different way, where a random selection of residents could vote to to disqualify the election results. And you can imagine who those random people are going to be. Their mama, their daddy, cousin Jed, and their local biased politicians. So these are things that are under constant assault across the country. It's not just one racist individual standing in front of a voting booth saying, I'm going to shoot you if you vote. This is a systemic effort across the entire country. And
And
it
you
got so bad. Go ahead.
and you said that was in Texas, that Texas bill.
Yes.
Oh man, my state where I'm from. Oh man,
I'm
good
sorry
old
for you.
yeah, yeah, good. Hey, I'm gonna tell you this, Robert. Check it out. I was
Yeah.
I'm a truck driver by trade, so
Okay.
I go through very red rural areas, if you get what I'm saying, right? So I was
Yeah.
going through
Yeah.
Houston. I was going through Houston. So and it was maggot out. I'll put it to you like that, right? Like at the top of the big pine trees going through Sam Houston Forest, right? Like big Trump flags or whatever, Trump
Yeah.
holding his fist up or whatever on a whole bunch of just billboards, digital out and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And looking into it and looking at what you're saying basically is how, like you said, well, this is the thing. Now, I did see some of those, I call them lower races out there, but from what you're stating and what you're talking about the more strategic, high class races. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
Trump or whatever and everything like that.
Yeah.
To that level. And you're right. They're not gonna just call you the N word or say any type of slur or anything like that. And a lot of them are pretty much in a lot of ways they're going to either what show their hate through the paperwork or pretty
Yep.
much in a lot of ways, just but the thing is, and I know we're in a presentation, but why though? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's my thing right there. Why? Because you kind of showed how it's something that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's basically taught and shown, and it can also be innate within them. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's just why to even do that. That's my thing. What's the pull and drive for that division? You
Yeah.
know?
There's two two main drivers. One is what the Bible says, the love of money is the root of all evil, and that's
Right.
greed. and the desire for power. The
Mhm.
desire for power is great, and the desire to for in many people, not everyone certainly, but some people or many people, the desire to feel like they're better than one another or hate one another, despise, to have someone to despise, right? To have a target criminal that to blame for everything, right? A scapegoat, right?
Right.
That's part of it. Another is that again, it was built into the fabric of this country from the founding fathers, which is
Mhm.
really, really sad. And then it's and some of it is just like personal malice, and some of it is a power play. And so, in this power thing is really important because you have people that have nothing, you know,
Mhm.
that ain't got nothing going on, no job, no accomplishments in life, uh, don't do much of anything. And these people, these high falutin races that you're pointing out
Mhm.
can tell those people, look, you don't have anything. I'm beating you up, but at least you're not black. At least you're white,
Mhm.
right? And so that
Mhm.
gives them some sort of comfort to think they're better than somebody else. And on a higher level, the Bible tells us in Ephesians chapter 5 that we not wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, against principalities, against the rulers of this world and spiritual wickedness in high places. And
Right.
so, above all of this, and this is not to be, overstate this sort of thing, but above all of this, there is a grander scheme of demonic influence and oppression, right? And the devil loves to oppress people and to set people against one another, and these sorts of things are are planned at very high levels. And when you see lots of people from all over the place doing this, then you know that there's more than just human influence going on,
Right.
right? And so we have to deal with it as human influence. We can pray about it uh, against the spiritual influence. But both of those things are, and all of those things are working together to make this happen.
Right.
And another thing, too, is that once people attain power and privilege, they are very loath to surrender it. Once people have vilified somebody and made them out to be the bad guy, they're very loath to see that person as a human being, let alone as an equal.
Right.
So there's that spiritual and emotional inertia that goes on, that mental inertia as well. And so we see it so bad that the Supreme Court, and this is a stacked Supreme Court, stacked by Trump, they said that Alabama's, you know, uh, congressional districts were just too much, even for them. And Alabama refused to redraw the districts despite a Supreme Court order. So all of this um, representation about the Constitution, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump and all these guys talk about the Constitution. Well, when the Constitution goes against what they want,
Right.
they don't do it, right? So it's not the Constitution that they're concerned with; it's themselves and their own prejudices.
Mhm. In their pockets too.
And
Like,
their pockets. They don't
yeah.
forget that because
Yeah.
that's a good point because they make a whole lot of money from the black community being consumers instead of keeping money in the community like Jewish communities and Asian communities are allowed to do.
Yeah. We are the largest consumers.
The infamous DMG, right? I got to
Yeah.
put emphasis in front of his name because I don't know, he's copying Biggie for something. I don't know, but anyway, the infamous DMG had the Richardsons that came on, and they were financial they're
Yeah.
financial and
Advisor.
advisors.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I was gonna say
Yeah.
advancers. I don't know what's going on with me. Maybe I watched too much Star Wars, but
Yeah.
anyway,
Maybe. Yeah.
so
They're trying to help us advance.
yeah, yeah. So they pretty much broke down one how in the black community the dollar does not our money doesn't stay in our community more than a few minutes, right?
Right.
You have
Right.
the Asians, you have the Mexicans who stays in there for like what I'll say like uh a couple of days, and the Asians a few months. The Europeans, what I'm saying, the white folks, they stay like months at a time, and then the Jews, and they're just in there just indefinitely, and it takes them a while to get out. You know what I'm saying? It
Yeah.
doesn't even
Exactly.
leave. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's that it's very interesting you brought that up, and we'll talk about that. But anyway, please continue, Chief.
Sure. Sure. And then on that point, the the things that we're seeing here are systemic reasons that
Mhm.
were put in place specifically to keep those dollars from staying in our communities. And this is after Reconstruction. This is like the Tulsa being burned down and all that stuff. And
Uh-huh.
this has been architected this way. And then other populations that came in didn't have those sorts of uh, obstacles to the same degree that we have. They had obstacles, right? You know, Latinos and Chinese, they had obstacles, right?
Right.
And Jews, absolutely. But the degree of those obstacles, it's only Black people and Native Americans that have suffered similar amounts. In fact, they're the only ones that have suffered more than us because they're almost eradicated.
Right.
Right. So, but these are systemic things we're discussing that explain, that have a high degree of explanatory power for why those dollars don't stay in our communities. Government policies, right? The Bible says, you know, you must not pervert justice. You must not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the rich. You're to judge your neighbor fairly. Government policies don't always do this, and so there are a list in Wikipedia, and they're not always reliable, but there's certain things they do well. But there's this list of expulsions of African Americans that they have, where African Americans literally run out of town, and this is, you know, or the town's destroyed, and you know, and this is starting at the Reconstruction. So in the 19th century, it happened in Ohio, Michigan, Louisiana, Tennessee. Notice that there's both northern and southern states here that did this. One of the kind of hidden um, secrets of American history is that Jim Crow existed in the South, and we that gets all the attention. But what the North doesn't like to take a look at is apartheid existed in the North. Right, there were still the same types of barriers for Black people in the North. It's just that it was more severe in the South, right? So this happened in the 19th century, and then there's a whole nother list of like 50 others that happened in the 20th century of Black people being literally just either chased out, burned out, and this happened across the country. Where, like in Tulsa, you know, you build up a nice neighborhood, and then all of a sudden, jealous white people come and destroy the whole thing, and the U.S. Army helped bomb them, and they killed over 300 people. And this happened in a lot of different areas, right? There's a movie made about another city where this happened, and this wasn't isolated to one or two areas. It happened literally across the country. Redevelopment is another one. I grew up, thinking that redevelopment was like this. It was presented to our class by this teacher as being this, kind of magnanimous thing that helps the community, this, that, and the other thing. What I learned later is that redevelopment means just that, to develop it completely over again, to get rid of the people who are there, knock the whole thing down, and then rebuild, right, for a different population. And this was something that, and so there's both conservatives and liberals that are guilty of this. It's across the political board. It's more prominent with the conservatives and MAGAs and things, but the liberals or the left wing and progressives, they're guilty of it too. It's not, this is something that's across the board. It's less severe in one direction from the other, but it's across the board. Another thing is interstate highways. The interstate highway system was targeted to destroy as many Black neighborhoods as possible many times. In fact, one of the people in Mississippi who was responsible for the interstate highway management there and building it out in Mississippi targeted Black neighborhoods, and especially the neighborhoods of Black civil rights leaders, to destroy them and build interstate highways through them. It happened in Oakland, for instance. There's a big place called the Maze where 580, 880, and 80 all intersect, and that used to be, it goes through West Oakland, part of it. And what they did was there used to be a prosperous, working class, nice, working the middle class Black community there, Black neighborhood, and they built a freeway through it, and now it's the hood, right? I mean, in the it's in the stereotypical sense of the word, right? That
Right.
things have been destroyed there. In Atlanta, when I was there giving this presentation, when the church, Parbler Hill flew me to Atlanta, my brother that was the Christian brother that was my host there showed me how this giant freeway, uh, 10 lanes had gone through a black neighborhood that used to be there as well. So this was across the country that they did this. Uh,
Mm.
Again, Reuters, U.S. freeways flatten black neighborhoods. What? Nationwide. This was a system. This wasn't just one racist doing one thing. This was a government policy, a system of destroying black neighborhoods by using the interstate highway system to do it. And once a neighborhood is destroyed like that, it's very hard or sometimes impossible to build it back. Now, uh, some some of those highways are crumbling, and with God, there's always hope, because He's not mocked, but also He'll bring hope and rays of light in times of darkness. And there are those who want to undo that legacy. Like in Atlanta, what they want to do is they want to build bridges across the divided neighborhoods to try to help the neighborhoods be able to interact. They will never undo the damage. It's only a drop in the bucket, but at least
Right.
it's a small step in the right direction for there. So another thing, it happened, and people talk about the South, Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, and all that. It happened in San Diego, right? And so now they want to try to undo some of that damage as well. Another thing is eminent domain in terms of government policies. This is a story in right not far from where we live. There's a Sheraton, a Four Points, a Four Seasons hotel, big, giant,
Mm-hmm.
luxurious. This is what the neighborhood used to work with. I used to get my hair cut there. There was a donut shop next door. There was a cleaners across the street. There's a Filipino owned donut shop. I went to a black owned barber shop. There was a Filipino owned donut shop next door. There was another black owned or Latino owned cleaners across the street. And then on the corner, there was this corner store, right? And that's kind of the staple of neighborhoods, right? And so of local neighborhoods. And they started by a slander campaign calling it Whiskey Gulch because they sold liquor there, right? So they called it, and then they started doing over reporting on crime and alleged crime. What it did was it built up this image of a bad neighborhood, so to speak. And that enabled them to go to the state legislature and get things redistricted. And then now, here's what it looks like. There's no neighborhood store anywhere. And all of that is gone. It's flattened. And this is what's built on top of it. And again, this is a government policy. This isn't some individual racist going out and shooting somebody or denying them a job or whatever it is. It took a government policy at the state, ultimately at the state government level, in order for this to happen.
Right.
And these sorts of things happen all across the country. Another thing, government policies. Black taxpayers more likely to face audits. And this is the IRS, the people that do the audits. And this is a Senate hearing where this guy was put on the chair for this and grilled. And so they said, well, and of course their answer is, well, we don't know why this is happening. Yes, it's true. We don't know why it's happened, but we got our best people working on it, right? So this again is a systemic matter. The IRS isn't one racist doing things. This is a system, a nationwide system run by the U.S. government. And again, you must not pervert justice. You must not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the rich. You are to judge your neighbor fairly, right? So another thing, eminent domain abuse, again, is a devastating fact on African Americans because it's disproportionately targeting African American neighborhoods and homes. And it's things like the Gullas and Geechees. These people are fighting for their land. And what they're doing is that they're making up these rules to take land away from them because, say, they're not connected to the municipal or county power line or water line, for instance. And these folks have outhouses and septic tanks that take care of that they've been using for 150 years and they work fine. But now they changed the rules so that they have an excuse to take this land away from these people. And they didn't care about it for a long, long time, but now they're starting to see it as prime real estate. They're taking the land from the Gullas and Geechees and giving it to white developers. And this is around South Carolina. Okay.
Wow. And let me say this too.
And I have family land in Midlothian, Texas, right? And
Mhm.
my great grandfather, he got land during the times of absolute, like it was like after slavery. You see
Yeah,
what I'm saying?
yeah,
And well, like not, I don't know after, but I gotta get the time phrase. But he had that land right now. It's the only patch of land left there in Midlothian. Places are, people are moving in, and where his land is located at, right? Well, my land
yeah.
is
Mhm.
right downtown in the middle of Midlothian, right down there downtown area. And they're pretty much trying to, they all the black houses and stuff like that, they're completely gone. They're all gone. All of them are
That's
gone.
true. Yeah,
And it's just like, and I, by you saying that, by bringing up the Gullah Geechee, that kind of made me think about it. Like maybe that's what happened to them, because I noticed that a lot of black people, if they had land, they lose it. Either it's stolen or it's just they just couldn't afford it.
yeah,
Because of
yeah.
property tax. But
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And in fact, there was the hundred black men of Silicon Valley was in a meeting, that they were holding, and they were working with the Mississippi Supreme Court. With the hurricane that tore up New Orleans. Um, I forgot what it is now. Katrina. Yeah.
yeah,
So anyway,
Katrina.
yeah, after Katrina, like they were, Katrina just devastated New Orleans and I mean Louisiana and Mississippi, right? And so what was happening was they were that the county courts allegedly, and no doubt actually, were taking land away from black people because black people couldn't in houses because they couldn't prove they owned them. Because what they did was that they would have their family records stored in Bibles, right, in the family Bibles, and those Bibles got washed away by Katrina, and they didn't have records of it. So what they would do would be taking the deeds to those to that property and giving it to white people. And the same thing happened in New Orleans, but certainly in Mississippi. The Mississippi Supreme Court was actually looking into that. So there, like don't want to keep everything so depressing because there's always hope. By fighting and continuing to raise these issues, God can bring hope out of seemingly hopeless situations. So, for instance, one of the things that there's a beachfront property, and this was in Manhattan Beach in Southern California, and it was returned 100 years after the state of California seized it, and that land is worth $75 million. So it was returned to the family, the descendants of of the ones that they seized it from, right? And so now many Black Americans, like you were saying, Brother Craig, is that many Black Americans had their land stolen. Now they're fighting to get it back, right? So this should inspire us to try to do what we can to right some of these wrongs and to have the assurance that with God's help that we can make progress.
Right.
And then there's more, right? There's redlining and black homelessness. There's, this so-called replacement theory that is coming up where white people, at least the prejudiced ones don't want to be replaced by brown and black people because they see their numbers declining and ours increasing. It goes throughout education and, everywhere in society. There's plenty of evidence for these critical race theory observations. So the people like Donald Trump, like Ron DeSantis, like John MacArthur, and a lot of their black followers that basically repeat the same things they're saying, trying to say this is a racist ideology and all of that.
Right.
That is simply false. There is evidence that supports every one of the observations of critical race theory. There's a vast body of objective, proven, documented evidence that this is what's going on. And these things actually do, from any biblical perspective, they need to be addressed, they need to be challenged, and they need to be corrected. So there's also examples of quote neutral rules, right, that have racist outcomes. I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. But you know, God loves justice and fairness. He's kind to everyone on the earth. But these neutral rules actually don't over time. We talked about the voter suppression laws, about the highway laws, and all of these type of government laws and voter restriction laws, right? Those things can be racist in intent, and then even if and without being and appear neutral on the surface. Artificial intelligence, self driving cars don't recognize African Americans as pedestrians. And then some AI doesn't even recognize Black people as being human. That's because there's no representation in Silicon Valley and the companies that create these programs, and they don't care to have it, to have that representation. They don't even think about Black people in particular or minorities in general.
Wow.
Companies that hire only from a short list of schools. This company that I worked for a long time, where I didn't see any Black product managers, did that. What they did was they only hired from, quote, the top 20 schools, and they know that very few Black people go to those, even though they're just as smart in the schools that Black people do go, like the HBCUs. They're people just as smart, but they won't hire from those. Same thing with college admissions. They have, I went to Berkeley, and they have, in the admissions, they have these lists of preferred schools for who gets into Berkeley, right? And my school wasn't one of them. I came from Kansas, but they basically, they have these, but those sorts of things are very highly correlated with racial representation. And so when you favor those types of schools for admission, you're actually favoring white people over Black people. Same thing. Jobs requiring degrees, for jobs that don't require college. These so-called IQ tests, these things are really nefarious because it's impossible. There's no such thing as an IQ test because no one knows what intelligence is. And if no one knows what it is, it's impossible to test for it. And it's certainly impossible to test on a piece of paper where you're writing answers into circles, or you're, guessing which utensil goes with a cup or whatever. And then also I've seen one recently where it's pattern matching, right? And they use this for so-called gifted programs. And it's pattern matching. Which way does this square face to match this pattern? Now how does that test intelligence? It does test pattern matching, but there's all other kinds of things like emotional intelligence, being able to read people, street smarts, be able to do, math really well or play chess really well. There's all kinds of different ways that people can exhibit intelligence that cannot be measured. You cannot measure you cannot test accurately what you cannot define and measure. You cannot test or measure accurately what you cannot even define in the first place. So those really tend to be more cultural adherence tests or cultural sort of favoritism tests. And in fact, when I was about to go to grad school, I was talking to one of the senior professors at Berkeley, and I was talking about these tests and because Harvard, and after a while, stopped even accepting them because they don't have any correlation to your exiting GPA. So I was talking to him, and I said, well, those tests don't really measure anything. He said, yeah, except how well you do on the test. That's all they measure, is how well you do on that particular test. That SATs, GMATs, and all that.
Right.
And he said, but we need something, and there's nothing else, so that's what we use, right? So and what that does is it does a very unfavorable bias, but it also impacts the self-image of people and the perception of certain people that certain people have compared to others when they're using this phony metric that doesn't even exist and doesn't really measure anything useful to classify and categorize people as being smarter than someone else or not. Now, that doesn't mean no one is quote smarter than anybody else, because there's people that can do algebra in first grade and that kind of stuff. That's a different topic. But overall, there's no such thing as and you can test for how well someone can solve math problems at any given stage in their life. But in terms of IQ, as in general intelligence, there's no such thing. And this is something that's used against Black people in a very indirect and insidious way, or other racial minorities in an indirect and insidious way, because it has a false metric that it's using to make people feel like some people are better than others.
Right.
Another thing, business and promotions, right? The old boy club, in companies. That's and that's the way that still operates today. Justice, we talked a whole lot about that, but also there's this whole idea of how crime is defined, meaning that white collar crime often requires, as we've seen in the news with all these trials, going on at, you know, Trump trials and other trials, do you know it's illegal, right? But for us, you know, for no collar crime, it's, you know, ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? And then they have these club-fed prisons. They have them out here where they have alarm clocks, and the families get to come see them, and they play with their kids, right? And then for the poorest, you know, which disproportionately, you know, racial minorities, they have bars, right? And these bars and alarm clocks, and the bars open and close, and you don't have any say so in anything, right? So just the way that justice is given, the way that sentences are handed out, that somebody that, you know, steals $1 billion or $1 million, you know, or from poor people's, you know, grandmother's retirement funds, they go to Club Fed, and then somebody that steals a car does hard time, you know, 20 years in the pen, right? So that type of disparity is systemic. It is not individual. And again, you know, just measuring crime statistics, they only measure what's called street crime, which tends to happen more in poor or minority neighborhoods, right? But then when domestic crime is rampant, really good example. My wife and I, we drove up to Oregon one day, and I was going into the store to buy something. I forgot it was, but anyway, there was a newspaper on the stand, and it was this little town. I don't even remember where it was. Little town in Oregon, and the headline, the front page of that paper said that if domestic crime were counted in crime statistics, our little Oregon town would have the nation's highest crime rate. So
Man.
just the way, you know, what crime, what activities they choose to report as crime has racist outcomes, even though it's neutral on the surface. Crime statistics, that sounds neutral, but it's not. It's the way that crime is defined and the types of crime that are even reported that are systemically different and systemically biased.
Right. Man, that's so you went through one of them strange little towns.
Yeah,
Like, oh man, like never seen you around here, Mr.
yeah,
Robert.
yeah, one of those towns, right? Yeah, and I'm glad it was Oregon, you know, I suppose, but and not, you know, some other place, but basically that was on the front page of their local paper, right? And
Mm,
they were having a truth moment, you know, and that's something that once you see it, you can't unsee it. Again, it's this critical race theory is not an ideology. It's not some Marxist plot or communist plot that's rooted in Marxism. It is not. It is documented observations. It is a body of study that is well documented and has tons and tons and tons of evidence behind it. And it's, you know, it's collecting things that have been proven over years and years and years by other sources as well. So the laws, rules, and systems can be racist, not just individuals. That they can be racist even if they don't intend them to be, or the people that are executing the rules, enforcing the rules aren't racist themselves. And then also they can hurt people long after they're eliminated, like redlining is doing now, or building or plowing down black neighborhoods to make interstate freeways. That hurts people today, even though it was done years ago. So again, some of the objections, we'll try to make this two of the main objections that you'll see is these reactionary and racist disinformation and misinformation, and that is rampant, and that is most of probably what all of us have seen. And another one is thoughtful and considered objections, right? So this reactionary stuff, CRT is racist, we've seen, you know, abundant evidence that is absolutely false. And then there's some politician here in front, you know, co-signing all of this nonsense, right? So one thing is that most of the people that object to critical race theory have no idea what it really is. And if you read the objections to critical race theory, the things that we've been discussing so far, the things I've been sharing with you, these are things that you'll never hear mentioned. What you hear is these things that it's Marxist, it's racist, it's divisive, it's, you know, trying to push ideology, woke ideology onto our children. All of those things are absolutely false. And the people that say those things, 99 times out of 100, they have no idea what it really is or what it really says. And here, you know, critical racist theory is poison. You ask them what it is, hey, I don't know. Same thing with DeSantis and Tucker Carlson and this. They really don't know what this stuff is, but they don't care. That's the thing. They don't care. What they don't want is racism being exposed and brought out for what it actually is, and the damage that it does being actually told. So some of the reactionary ones is it's divisive. What did Jesus say? I came not to bring peace, but a sword, right? Of
Mm.
course, if you're doing wrong and other people want to do right, you're going to be divided.
Mm-hmm.
That's natural, right? Another thing, it's anti-white, it's racist. No, it's anti-injustice for all of the different examples that we've seen across all of society. Another one, it makes white people feel guilty. But what does the Bible say? People who conceal their sins will not prosper, but if they confess and return from them, they will receive mercy. Proverbs 28:13. We are supposed to feel guilty when we do wrong. We're supposed to feel guilty when other people are being done wrong and we don't do anything about it. The Bible says that's supposed to happen, right? It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. It's a cleansing thing because that's the way guilt is the way people correct things. If they don't feel guilty, they never change. Another thing is a lie. It's an excuse for lack of merit, right? That critical race theory is just because black people or whoever it is don't have merit. But that's the same thing they said about Jesus. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Can anything good thing come out of the hood? Ready? Can anything come out of East Oakland? Right? No, it's not a lack of merit. It is merit that is being denied, merit that is not being given a fair chance to develop. When people are building freeways down and tearing your business down to build hotels and freeways, that is not a lack of merit on your part.
Mm-hmm. It's not.
Yeah. And so, yeah, and also they don't want it being said. But again, that's reflected in the Bible too, with the preaching of the gospel. And of course, this isn't the gospel, it's a different thing, but this is the common mindset that people have even 2,000 years later, because human nature hasn't changed. You know, we're still sinners, we still fall short, and we still are selfish. So what they were saying back then, didn't we not strictly command you that you're not teaching this name? You know, and they're saying, don't talk about critical race theory and about black history and Tulsa and all of that. And behold, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. You intend to hold us accountable for the wrong that we actually did. And that's the same mindset behind most of the objections, and particularly the reactionary and racist types of objections to critical race theory. They don't want to be held accountable for what they did. They don't want it brought out. They don't want to look at it in the face, and they don't want to be held accountable or responsible. But again, the Bible says that we are to be accountable or responsible and to correct the wrong we do and to face up to it and repent and to change. So another thing else, where also else fails, there's slander. And this is a guy named Frank Turek. He's a YouTuber, and he goes, he's this Christian apologist, he calls himself, and he goes all over the place trying to, defend the Bible. He also has very racist views when it comes to social situation, and particularly critical race theory. And these are basically lies, saying that, what is, he says that it's pits the oppressed and the oppressor class, and the oppressed are non-Christians and the oppressor are Christians. When in anything that we have shown today and talked about today has anything come up about Christians oppressing non-Christians? It's not. It's phony Christians, yeah, in certain cases, but all of this is people doing wrong to other people. It doesn't matter what religion they are. What they're doing it is on a racial basis, not a religious one. So, and then it has nothing to do with LGBTQ and trans and all of that sort of stuff either. This is critical race theory about how people are treated according to their race. Another thing, it has nothing to do with poor, middle class, and owning class, and able and disabled. Where on earth did he get this from? See, they throw all kinds of other stuff in there and actually lie about it. One, because they don't understand it, and two, because they want to sink the boat. They don't want it discussed, and so they want to misrepresent it to make it something that it's not, so that their followers won't support it either. Okay, so what it really is, it's negatively impacted people, and it's about systems and rules and not about individual people. So all of this stuff is slander, right?
Right.
Um, and again, when all else fails, there's slander. This is from Hillsdale College. This was in my Facebook feed, and they had these ads that pop up the same way in my YouTube video, during the ads they show in YouTube videos for some reason. But they talk about the Marxist roots of critical race theory. The Marxist roots of critical race theory. Critical race theory has no Marxist roots. It is an academic study by black researchers who were going through actual data from the United States from the time they were studying it back to the Reconstruction time. That was before Karl Marx was even born. So again, it, with all else fails, slander, right? And that same mindset again is shown in the Bible when the it's not just people, but they said the same type of mindset of people even said this about Jesus himself. Then the Jews answered, said to him, "Do we not rightly say that you're a Samaritan and have a demon?" And a Samaritan was the N-word back then, right? They were calling Jesus the N-word and said he had a demon in today's language, right? Because they didn't want to hear what he had to say. And he was saying things about them that were true, that were negative, but that were true. And they didn't want him saying those things. And that's the same way that these people behave today in terms of critical race theory, including many, many, many professing Christians. Like these were the people that were supposed to know the law, right? The Jews, the Jewish leaders, they were supposed to know the law and live the law, and they were doing the opposite. Same thing, today, these so-called Christian leaders, the right-wing ones, are supposed to know the Bible and teach the Bible and live the Bible, and they're doing the opposite. Things haven't changed. This shows that the Bible is true. It's true then. It was true then. It's true now. Okay? And it's not the first time they've done it. See, they talk about critical race theory today, but back then they said race mixing is communist, right? Marxist, right? And then here, the Jew communists behind race mixing. And again, Marxists, communists, same thing. Karl Marx, they got him highlighted right here, right? So it's not the first time they've done it. This is a repeated tactic that these same types of people, these same mindsets of people have done ever since this country was founded, that imposed slavery, and especially after slavery, that after slavery was abolished, they said the abolition was some kind of ungodly demonic plot. They said civil rights was some kind of communist plot. Everything that comes up where Black thinkers in particular are realistically addressing the real problems of racism, they find some way to slander it, twist it, and call it something that it's not. And the modern day N-word is communist, right? So that they want to call it Marxist communist instead of using the N-word to describe it. And that's how they slander all of the Black thought that addresses racism, especially systemic racism.
Wow.
And it won't be the last time they do it, right? So it's the same thing. And a lot of times, right, they won't even be able to define critical race theory. And it's the same thing when they were crucifying Jesus, the same type of mindset. It's not the same situation, but the same kind of mentality. Pilate asked him, "What's your charge against this man? We wouldn't have handed him over to you if he wasn't a criminal." They couldn't even say what he did. And it's the same thing. These enemies of critical race theory can't even tell you accurately what it is. So it won't be the last time they do it. They did it with abolition. They did it with a Reconstruction. They did it with civil rights. They're doing it now with critical race theory, and they will do it with the next Black thought that comes out of the mainstream Black community. They will not stop. So what we need to do is to pray, see Christ, that God got us, and fight this stuff, on a human level as well, and spread correct information to counter the misinformation that they're spreading out all over the place. So here's some objections of examples of thoughtful objections. Come now, let us reason together, said the Lord, though your sins be as scarlet, they'll be white as snow. Okay. So some thoughtful objections include all people should be treated the same. And that's a thoughtful objection. The problem with it, though, is this scenario. Suppose you had someone that was that was paying $1,000 a day for 10 years for doing a job. Someone else was being paid $1 a day for 10 years for doing exactly the same job. Then some well-meaning soul says, wait a minute, this is actually $100 a day job. And so everybody ought to be paid $100 a day. What's wrong with that, of course, is that this $1,000 a day person has had all kinds of wealth, investments, savings, bought new things, been able to invest, grow their wealth, and take full advantage of that $1,000 a day for the past 10 years. The $1 a day person has had debt pile up, hasn't been able to feed their family, doesn't own a home, barely owns anything else, has to rent a car, and has all of this debt that they've got to work off at $100 a day for the next 10 years. So this all people should be treated the same only works if people have been treated the same in the past. But if there's wide disparities in the way that they have been treated, then that approach doesn't work. And so in the Bible, it says, for instance, whoever steals an ox or sheep and slaughters it and sells it must pay back what? 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 sheep for the sheep. And that's because God understands that depriving someone of something that is valuable to them has costs that are not reflected in the purchase price or the sale price of whatever possession is that you took from them. There's this incurred debt and negativity, and this incurred extra benefit and positivity from stealing it, and debt negativity from having it stolen that needs to be set right. And it's not just going to be set right by doing exactly the same thing across the board. Another thing is that let's have pro-poor policies and not racial policies. And the idea is that that Black people in particular, racial minorities, are disproportionately hurt by these policies. So if we have policies that impact the poor, then Black people in particular will be disproportionately benefited for those. Now that's a thoughtful and reasonable idea, except the problem is it's failed minorities, especially Black people, every single time it's been tried. So affirmative action, for instance, started to include 95% of affirmative action actually they expanded it from, say, mostly Black people, Latino, like race-based, to gender-based. And then white women started getting included, and then 95% of the benefit of economic benefit from affirmative action ended up going to white women, white college-educated women, to be precise. And there's been several studies of this. Another thing was that white companies would have Black shell companies where they would get a little fraction of it, and then the white companies would get most of the benefit. So these pro-poor policies don't work. They've never worked. And the Bible actually shows the opposite. There was a time where Gibeon, where King Saul, slaughtered Gibeonites, and they were under the protection of Israel. God put a plague on Israel because of this crime and sin that Saul had committed. And David asked him, what to do about it. And they said, well, hang, 7 of Saul's sons. So they did it. But the principle there is that the Gibeonites were wronged by Israel, and the Gibeonites were made right. God didn't say, well, look, have this blanket restoration program for all Canaanites everywhere that you've wronged, because the Gibeonites will be disproportionately benefited. They were wronged, they were made right. So when wrong is done on a racial basis, then the right thing to do is to target it. The people who were targeted should get disproportional benefit on the same basis that they were hurt. Another one, communities don't have the same rights as individuals. That everything ought to be done on an individual basis and no help for the actual community, particularly Black communities or Latino communities, whatever, as a whole. Well, that's the opposite again of what the Bible taught and said, because the apostles, as we discussed earlier, they organized to meet the entire Grecian widows community needs. They didn't just say, okay, which one of you Greek widows was discriminated against and denied food, and we will give you this amount of food. No, they made a policy so that the entire community would be benefited the same way that they were withheld and discriminated against and and it wasn't, intentional because we dislike you, but that's just the way that it worked out, that the whole community got restitution. Another
Mm-hmm.
thing, we shouldn't have to pay for our ancestors' wrongs. That sounds kind of reasonable too. But,
Right.
but if you benefit from your ancestors having done wrong, then yes, you still own that stolen house. You still own that stolen land. It
You
was
do.
stolen, and you benefit from it. So Lamentations, and there are different, verses in the Bible that communicate the same principle. So in Lamentations 5:7, our ancestors sinned and are no more, and we bear their punishment. The reason that Israel was exiled wasn't just because of the sins of the people who lived that day. It was because of the accumulated sins over centuries where they disregarded God, disrespected God, and then God, the penalty, fell on everyone who was alive that day, right? The sins of our ancestors do influence the judgment of God because they're all going to get their individual judgments. That's absolutely right. But
Right.
also, God, is patient. He's merciful. And after a while, he said to Abram that the sins of the Amorites are not yet full, which means that 400 years later, or during Moses' times, uh, they came and conquered, Canaan, and all the sins that they've been committing all of that time. That cup of sin was full. God gave them time to repent. They didn't repent. They didn't change, and then He put the hammer down. Right. So that's what happens. So again, the bottom line of these reactionary objections is found in Titus 1:15. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But both their minds and consciences are defiled. So the reason that they hate this idea of racism being brought out is because they themselves are racist, and they just don't want that exposed. Okay. So anyway, are we out of time? Because it's about 5 o'clock.
Oh, no, no, no. We're not out of time, Robert. I mean, but here's the thing though. This You got me thinking, brother. You got me thinking. There's a lot of things I need to ask you. There's a lot of things I want to talk with you about. You know,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, because I ain't gonna lie. A lot of people tried to block me from having a conversation with you and bring you up here. You know what I'm saying? But that's another story. But other
Yeah.
than that, I have to say, you got me cooking. So I'm gonna tell you this. I heard your time ago out, and I know you're a very busy individual. How about this, Chief? If we could set up a part two, and
Okay.
part two, we can pretty much, in a lot of ways, get a little bit down with the nitty gritty. I talk with you like further on through the weekend. You know what I'm saying? And I can pretty much, in a lot of ways, go over the game plan. But one thing I want to ask you that kind of got me a little bit. Okay, so you talked about the system and the employees who are not racist, but they operate within a racist system that was set up, and they say it's my everyday job, et cetera, et cetera. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? So, those cops, for instance, okay, so they laid the mother and her children on the ground, right? Like they were criminals because they
Yeah.
confused it for a stolen vehicle in Montana.
Face
Um,
down. Yeah.
face down, and obviously, what can a woman and her two or three children do to a cop that's physically trained, kickboxing, all that other stuff, the
Yeah.
procedures to take a person down, disarm them, and you have like what, depending on the type of gun you have, a 5.7 or a Luger. You know what I'm saying? I don't know who deals with Lugers, but ugh.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. But I noticed that in those cops' mind, and one had the audacity to pretty much in a lot of ways run for sheriff. I know in that those cops' minds, they feel as if they were only doing their jobs. They didn't see nothing wrong with it. Had no moral compass. Of course, no one got on those cops, but they didn't see anything wrong with it.
Right.
They
Right.
didn't see
Th-
anything. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Chief.
No, no, that's right. I mean, they thought, and that's the insidious danger of this type of thinking is that after a while, people just think that's the way it's supposed to be,
Right.
and they think it's natural. That's just the way you do things, right? And
Mhm.
so that's the real danger of this racism, the systemic racism. And myself, I had to, and I grew up in these Midwestern places and didn't see, any representation stuff. And so I had to physically deprogram myself and say, yes, I'm just as good as anybody else. Black doctors are just as good as white doctors. A black expert is as good as a white expert. And, and that, and then, but there are people that never get to that point and they're imprisoned by it.
Mm. And they're imprisoned by it. Cause
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, man. That cause that even see, it's not just a white and black thing too, right? When it comes down to the system of racism, right? Because all right, I'm gonna tell you this, right? Just short story a little bit.
Yeah.
I have to run in and out the courts, right? I really hate it in and out the courts because I'm dealing with people trying to steal a few properties that I own, right? And because some things are in my name because I'm a junior, so I got to deal with that. But here's the killer part, right? And the recent property that I'm dealing with, right, there is an attorney. He is, when attorneys decrypt things, right? Like you get the paper or whatever, like the motion or the response. If it's decrypted and stuff like that, they're trying to hide something or they keep trying to keep something public. I mean, not public. People can't see it, right? So, what this guy did, he pretty much in a lot of ways forged my great grandmother's name, right? And she died before I was born, and pretty much tried to say the property was his because she mysteriously rose up from the grave and gave the property over to him, right? Now, and rich millionaire, he, very, very vulgar individual, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But, the killer part was the notary that he used who stamped it didn't have my consent, not my signature, not anything like that. So I reported her into I reported her into the right people and they revoked her notary. You feel
Okay.
me? So, so I have that. So everything he did is null and void. But the killer part was when I went down to the courts, right? And I have one in my neighborhood, right? So I went to ask the ladies, black lady, of course. I said, okay, I'm X, Y, and Z. I need you to give me this so I can do that. Immediately, she felt as if I did not know what I was talking about. Are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't, what I'm saying, all of this. And I was like, lady, I need this. And she kept cutting me off when I was talking. I kind of laughed a little bit. And I just told her that, look, it's accessible to the public. I need this man's motion on what he did. I have someone representing me because, they're not going to listen to me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, and she gave it to me reluctantly. But my point was bringing it up. She discriminated against me, even though she's a public servant. You see what I'm
Right.
saying?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
if it was a guy walking up there in a suit or whatever, just he walked up in there and she felt maybe he was important, he know what he was doing, and he belongs here. She was gonna give it to him. And and I just it's so many things I would love to get into with you with this topic because it doesn't show what's just wrong with white folk, right? It show also what's wrong with black folk who, because I am in my case, right? I would say you have some black folk who have this mentality, who are in the upper scale, who because
Mhm.
they have certain credentials or they have a certain view on things, they have this viciousness towards their own that's even more potent than white people being racist. You know what I'm saying? And it's like it's a poison within us as a people. You see what I'm
Right.
saying? And we can't, if you ask me, we can't move forward unless that is cured, that cancer is cut.
Yeah.
But I'm just gonna say, Pastor Robert, that had me in my mind thinking. You had me play back everything that happened in my life, things that happened to other people. You know what I'm saying? I even had people who tried to use religion in a racist way,
Hmm.
justifying their actions, saying that this is what God wants. You see what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
just to pretty much throw a tidbit at you, a lot of people in a lot of ways would look at it as the factor like, well, this is the religion itself, right? And I don't believe it is, but a lot of people try to use that and run with it, right? And of course, with those who they look at certain slave masters and say they did X, Y, and Z. But we'll get into that because this is very totally interesting, Chief. I gotta
Oh,
give it
praise
to
the
you.
Lord. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yes. No,
Yeah.
thank you for blessing me with it because you gave me a real different perspective. But guess what? One thing we gotta do, Chief. because you know you're the elusive Pastor Robert Ash. You're not really accessible. You're elusive.
Okay.
But we gotta get a part two. We'll come back, and if you want, we can have people to come and talk and ask questions respectfully. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Jets and Jaguars. And for those who don't know, a Jaguar's a car. But no cursing with Mr. Robert Ash. Keep it respectful. Don't cut the man off. He won't cut you off. Have decorum. And first of all, in a lot of ways, be patient. For this man is very patient with you. But other than that, Pastor Robert Ash will be back for part two. And I can't wait for that. But Pastor Robert, do you have anything else to say before we close it out, Chief?
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for being here and for having me. To your points, I think you brought out really good points. I think that what happens is that you're right. There's more to it than racism, but what happens is that racism exacerbates already existing problems of class prejudice and that sort of stuff, right? And if we can get this done, or at least try to fight this, then we can have a hope of making progress in other areas. And I tell you something I think that's kind of sad, but true, and that is like with like the OJ and the and these sorts of situations, is that what we're seeing is that that people who are Black are just people, right? And people do exactly the same things. Clarence Thomas is another one, right? That people are people, and people have right, wrong, sin and good in the that they do. And so what we should do, hopefully, is to be able to fight this whole systemic racism part, so that we won't have that on our necks, as well as the one that likes to serve massa and be harsher on his own people than the white man, right? So this is just one step that we should keep fighting for and educating people about, so that at least this is one other problem that we can help get off of our necks.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And that, my friends, is critical racism within the Bible. That's part one.
The critical race theory. Critical race theory.
Yeah, critical race theory. Critical race theory. Okay, you got me. Critical race theory.
All right, bro.
I ain't perfect. But I'm gonna get there one of these days. But we will be back with part two with the elusive Pastor Robert Ash. Yeah, I gotta get the elusive, Chief. But I have to say, man, like I said, that was one heck of a presentation. It's not even done yet. But I can't wait to get more input with the crowd and what people will see. But further than that, I have to let it go with the one and only mystical, majestic master of multiversal music, the one and only ONE, Neo Love. Take us home, Neo. Take us home.
God bless you.
Yeah. I know I got about 30 seconds to make y'all feel this before y'all turn it off these days. That I might not even release this. But I be doing this shit for me. Help me get through. I feel like I give until I can't, but most don't recognize it till I ain't. Blood on them covers, she hoping paint. Sorry, mama, but it ain't. This world took a toll on me, and everyone that say they love me always seem to follow me. The same one that call me great, treat me like I ain't shit. I read between the lines, it's written all over your eyes. I see the disappointment in the eyes of the ones who want me dead, but I ain't never been scared. I tried to get there. Sometimes I wonder if I survived or did I die on that ride to that hospital. Demons all around me, I am not mental. This game of life, it is not simple. Last time